this is a kind of hands-on presentation about what you might want to think about. So for some of you, this may be kind of stuff that you live with, for others it might be new to you. So a little bit about LPLD. This is a condition I was born with. It's an ultra-rare recessive genetic disorder, and the population is 1 to 2 in a million. So people with the condition don't produce any or enough of the enzyme lipoprotein lipase, which is responsible for metabolizing fats. If fat is eaten, it travels around the bloodstream, giving the blood its classic creamy white appearance and causing symptoms. And this is the picture here is the vial of the blood of a young child with LPLD and very high triglycerides. So if you can imagine that's running around your body, the symptoms are abdominal pain, which is often severe, pancreatitis, which can lead to chronic pancreatitis, an enlarged liver and spleen, also painful, yellow spots, which are called xanthoma, fatigue, people call it postprandial fatigue, so it's a bit like I would imagine, obviously I don't know because I've not lived without LPLD, what it feels like if you've had a very large meal and how tired you feel after that, but this is a constant state. Poor memory causes poor memory and problems and concentration, and problems during pregnancy can arise because in the third trimester the woman produces, the fat levels go up automatically. So if you're struggling with what you're eating as well, things become much more kind of difficult. And one of the big things that can happen is type 2 diabetes, which, and if you have high sugar levels, that's turned to fat, which then people can't metabolize. And I was diagnosed with diabetes type 2 in 2007, so I have both of those conditions. So in light of the 1 to 2 in a million, the possible population in the UK is estimated at around 120, and the cases known about currently are about 80, although there is thinking that it's a bit underdiagnosed, but that's kind of part of what we're working towards identifying. So treatment options for LPLD, until 2012 there was nothing. There was kind of stuff that kind of, as it goes, I guess, played around at the edges of the symptoms, but nothing that really helped anything particularly, actually. And there was no kind of clinical trials or evidence to show that this really was helpful. It was just kind of individual doctors saying, let's give this a go, this might be useful. So the kind of the medicine the medicine, how doctors treated the condition was very much to do with what they thought was best. There was no kind of consistent take on it. So the recommendation is to eat between 10 and 20 grams of total fat daily. This is animal fat, vegetable fat, added fat, intrinsic fat. And I ask you to think about how much fat is in your meal when you have lunch, actually, just to get a sense of how restrictive and restricting the diet is. So this is fat from nuts, seeds, fat in dairy, egg yolks, so olive oil, oily fish, avocados, you name it, I can't eat it. This is a picture of a macaroni cheese that I made for my children, who told me it was absolutely delicious. I've never tasted macaroni cheese. And I've made any number of cakes which I've never gone near my lips. So, in order to be symptom-free, it's really, really very restricted. So I brought my own lunch with me because it's easier, etc. In 2012, gene therapy, the first gene therapy in Europe, was authorised at the EMA, and this was for a very, very small proportion of a very small patient group. And I think partly because of that, there was only one commercial use of the product, and so in October 27, it's going to be withdrawn from the market. So, and this is what you were saying about the disease area and particular compounds, because they didn't invest in the disease area. So now Unicure have moved away from the disease area. More recently, volanesorsen, it took me a long time to learn that, is being developed by Axia Therapeutics, and that's an antisense therapy, and it lowers triglycerides. That's currently been filed at the EMA and the FDA for authorization, so that's where we're at with that. So a bit of our history. Back in 2008, I was a patient with the condition, and my sister got a new job in a financial PR company, And she went to an investors' day where the pharmaceutical company were looking to attract funding. And she said to the CEO, what's this condition that you're trying to treat? And he said, well, you'll never have heard of it. It's an ultra-rare condition. It's LPLD. And she said her jaw nearly hit the floor. So she came home and rang me up really excitedly, and I got really excited and wanted this drug now. I was completely ignorant of the whole drug development process. So contacted them, and the first thing I had to do was sign a form saying that I'd contacted them, they hadn't contacted me, because fundamentally pharmaceutical companies are not allowed to approach patients, just not allowed to do it. So that got me, they were very keen on meeting me, they wanted to kind of gain access to the patient experience, very keen on wanting to support me to set up a patient group and to give me funding to help me towards doing that. But in 2005, my middle child had been diagnosed with a metastatic brain tumour, and at that point his future was very uncertain and he was quite disabled. So there was absolutely no way I was going to be able to sort of work on this. But it did get me interested in the whole kind of sort of patient advocacy and moving forward to try and, you know, find patients, because I've grown up with this condition in absolute isolation and I've always felt very isolated, and I've always had this urge to meet other people and create something that makes our lives better. So 2012, through various things, I had the first ever patient information published on the Heart UK website from the patient perspective. And at that time also I set up the Rare Connect community, the LPLD community on Rare Connect, which is a branch of Eurordis. So this is the first time that patients could actually start meeting each other internationally and create a community. So all of this kind of led me to realise that actually to really do anything very kind of to be more effective, I guess, and to do more than just be a patient support group, we needed funding, and in order to get funding, we need to be a charity. So we had our first board meeting in July 2015, and a couple of months later, I was contacted by Axia Therapeutics, who are developing vanacin in September. Very interested, very keen to fund us to kind of set up a patient group, etc. So that kind of dovetailed nicely, really. Although I must say that ANT, which then turned into Unicure, were also saying that they were willing to fund us to set up. So our background is that very much our funding has been in pharma from the beginning, really. So we got our charity number in March 2016. So our funding, as I said, is a startup grant from Axia, which is on restricted funds. So we set in an application, they gave us money, and then we've been left to do with it as we wish. We've got a restricted grant from Chiesi Pharmaceuticals, I don't know how you pronounce that actually, we call them Chiesi, and that was, they had bought the marketing rights for Glibera, so Unicure had passed us over to Chiesi as being a possible funding source, and that was to make films and for patient meetings. So we delivered consultancy services for Axia, advisory boards, and we've had donations received. So a bit about the guidance to work with. First and foremost, as a charity, you need to work within the Charity Commission guidelines. That's what you're working within. For industry, as the previous speaker said, it's the ABPI code of practice that pharma needs to be looking at. Especially for us, page 38, clause 27, which is the relationship with patient organisations. So these are guidelines. I mean, Bell Pottinger recently can be evidence of what happens if a company doesn't follow the guidelines of their association that they belong to. Not good, really, but they are guidelines. So the key points of these guidelines is that the companies must respect the independence of patient organisations, where industry money has been used for a specific purpose. This should be stated clearly on the end product. And anything funded for specific purposes should be supported by a written agreement stating clearly what's been agreed. They cannot require that they're the sole funder, and they must ask permission if they're to use your logo in any way, stating what the use will be. And that's very much about just because they're giving you some money doesn't mean they can bandy your logo around as being supportive of them. The company can't influence the text of patient organisation information in a manner favourable to their own commercial interests. So that's quite an important one. They're not allowed to advertise their product in any way or influence patients to view their product favourably. And they have their own obligations to declare what they pay charities, and they must publish these either nationally or at European level. So I've giving, I don't know how many people who are wanting to do an application for a startup grant, but I'm just going to run through the various, because I know that when I came into this area, people said, oh, make a startup grant, and I thought, how do I do that? So here is some guidelines, really, and if anybody wants to see a copy of this, I'm very happy to email it over to them, so that if you're thinking about doing this, have a pro forma, because I found it much easier to work in that basis than trying to invent the wheel, really. So the things that you want to include in your proposal are, firstly, so what you're requesting money for. So ours was the start-up and initial running costs for the LPLD Alliance. So the first section is the executive summary. So this is a chance to say what the condition is, why the charity needs to exist, your history of activism prior to set up of the charity, which is a way of kind of selling yourself and your charity for this funding, really, that you can do this. So then you want the objectives of the charity, which is you'll take from your constitution. The keys to success. So if you've got your objectives, what do you need in order to fulfill those objectives? So this is why the money is needed and what you're going to do with it, really. A bit about governance. You want to say details of your charity number and the type, and the names of trustees with a brief biography. And then, importantly, a strategy and implementation summary. And this is like a business plan, really, and this is good practice for any charity, whether you're going for funding or not, is to have a sense of where you want to get to and exactly what steps you need to take that. And to break that down into years, really. So by the end of the first year, you want to, and this will help trustees to be able to kind of monitor you and what you're doing well. Fundraising, so you're doing a fund application to this company, but it's how else are you planning to raise funds? And this is because it's in the company's best interest not to be the sole funder, as well as yours, really. So it's good to diversify funding and to kind of say how you're going to do that. You want to say what the management structure of your charity is, so how the charity will operate on a day-to-day basis. So as chair, I do this stuff and I'm supported by my trustees. And then the breakdown of the amount requested and how the charity will measure its success. And then lastly, the total amount requested. So things to think about when you're doing an unrestricted grant is to be clear about what you're planning to do. So this is where the business plan is really important, really. I mean, it's vital. And this is something that I don't think I did as well as I possibly could do, so I'm passing it on, is cost carefully when asking for money. So really do think about what you're wanting. Do some kind of get some quotes from various places. Really think about what would be a reasonable amount to be asking for. And don't be scared of asking for it, I think, is the corollary of that. Think carefully about what the costs will be. So there's, so website development I haven't put here, but actually that's obviously the key one, because one of our aims is to kind of educate and raise awareness, and we do that with a website. So logo design, there's all sorts of bits and bobs that you want to kind of incorporate in this funding application. And as I said before, over ask, they can always come and negotiate you down. It's very unlikely they will negotiate up. Further, be sure that everything you've costed fits into your aims and objectives, and credit the company for funding received on your websites is good practice. So a restricted or an education grant is something for a specific project, like a patient meeting or some educational material and filmmaking, etc. And the source of the funds for the project has to be credited. That's the key thing there. So when we did our restricted grant, we used the same basic document as for the unrestricted grants, obvious, but and we adapted it. Be aware that your timescale for granting a funding request, I've said that rather badly, what I mean is you may have an agenda about what you want to do and what you want these funds for. Where that fits into the kind of finance department of the pharmaceutical company might be very different. So just be aware and just try and get some sense of what what their time scale might be. So be sure, if you're doing a patient meet or something, be sure to account for the cost of your time spent developing the projects as well as the actual running of the project. So there's quite a lot of admin around running, say, like a patient meeting. So incorporate that and give yourself an hourly rate and kind of identify that. And be sure that you can achieve what you've requested funds for. So you can have a contract to provide a service to a company, but only if such services are to support healthcare or research. What we have done is consultancy services, so I've been on a couple of advisory boards, and you can do speaker services, which I say I haven't done at the moment. So there should be a written agreement in advance detailing what the payment is for, and should there be a conflict, any perceived conflict of interest, you have to say, as you're writing or speaking publicly about the company or anything other issue, you have to declare this up front, and that should be in the contract. And if you do consultancy services, you'll need to submit an invoice. So the ongoing relationships with industry. So the key thing about when you're being funded by industry is obviously public perception. How, people, there's a lot of feelings about, oh, they're in the pocket of the farmer, or they would say that they're being funded by pharma, etc. And I think that's probably some of the reasons that pharma don't engage with patient organisations, that they're really worried about that conflict of, or perceived conflict of interest. And I have to say that the conflict of interest is perceived, usually. Not always, maybe, but certainly in our experience, if public perception was that we were in the pockets, that is a perception, it's not the reality, because no, we're not, we're independent. So I think one way of mitigating that is, if possible, don't rely on one company as the source of funding. And we've been fortunate in the fact that in our area, which amazingly, because it's such an ultra-rare condition, there have been 2 strands of development with the gene therapy and the antisense therapy. But there's grant applications that you can make. There's there's fundraising. So just because you have a chunk of money from a pharmaceutical company doesn't mean that you can't have money coming in from elsewhere. And the more you balance that, I think, the better the public perception can be. So the thing about rare disease field, take advantage of the support offered. Really, I think that's really, if there's a company out there who wants to fund you. It's not that easy to find funding. Lots of us, I have a full-time job, I do this in my spare time. I don't have time to go out and do lots of fundraising events and this, that and the other. I really just don't have the time. So if there's a chunk of money being offered me, I think I'd be foolish, and I think I would be not helping my patient group unless I accepted it. So accepted it or applied for it and went with it. So I'm not sure that I need to be going on that point particularly, but I think if there's money there, it's to the benefits of the patient organisation, and as we previously said earlier, there are mutual benefits for both parties. Another thing you touched on, actually, I was sitting there thinking, what else are you going to say? Is here today, gone tomorrow. As you said earlier, if you're looking at a single compound like Libera, it's been withdrawn from use in October. So Unicure and Chiesi have turned their backs. They've gone away there. And puff of dust is what I kind of like to think. And I think that's very, very relevant. Also, if you're working at an earlier stage, we've gone into companies with established drugs, so we haven't worked in the medicines development bit. But in an earlier stage, if the compound or the drug doesn't work in a clinical trial, they'll be gone in a puff of dust, really. So it's to take advantage of what's available at the time, I think. So finally, as again Bennett said in the earlier presentation, there's a lot of ways you can use your links with the company to push the patient's agenda. And there's a lot of, companies do a lot of awareness raising for their condition, and it's really important that the awareness raising they do actually speaks from the patient perspective, because if you're having a lot of awareness raising but the information they're giving out is wrong or doesn't fit with what you feel is the issues for your patients, that's kind of not great, really. But you have the opportunity to really kind of engage to make sure that what's being sent out there is actually in line with what is the patient experience. And also for, the side for the pharmaceutical company is that their applications to the EMA and to NICE, etc., will have much more credence if the clinical endpoints are what the patient needs, and if they can prove or show that what the benefit the drug gives is what the patient actually wants. And so they need to talk to patients in order to get a clear idea of that. I think always remember that you're equal partners with the company, and I think this was something that I struggled with to start with, because I was little me going into this world with kind of big pharmaceutical companies who are all very established, and it's quite hard to you know, and I hadn't been working for 10 years because I'd been a carer to my son, so I was slightly kind of, oh, how do you do this? But I mean, with time and with practice, it kind of gets more comfortable. But also, I think as I've gone on, I've realised that we have the ace in the pack, because we have the patient insight and the access to patients, and that's gold dust to pharmaceutical companies. It really is. And I think from that perspective, you know, we can stand tall alongside a big company or a little company. So these are my contact details, and as I say, I'm very happy to share a pro forma of the grant application if that's useful to anyone. And I think I may have finished on time. Yeah, yes, yeah. Fantastic. Okay. So yeah, so if anyone's got any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.